more than a century, the haunting voice of the iron horse echoed across the land. From the eastern seaboard, over the seemingly endless plains, and through the western mountains, steam locomotives fused a sprawling landmass into a solid nation. Of all the locomotives in the long history of the rails, one of the greatest was called Big Boy, a name by which the world knew an engine that closed a memorable era in western railroading. It was the last of the giants. Built as machines to produce transportation, steam locomotives seldom were endowed with grace of line, and then never at the sacrifice of efficiency and power or speed. For those who ran them and serviced them, the 25 engines of our 4000 class climaxed American steam freight locomotive design. So Big Boy was a railroad man's everyday working tool. Bankers or teachers or house painters secretly yearned to trade places with the engineer in his cab. The sight of Big Boy fighting the grades of Wyoming Sherman Hill was, to these aficionados, a picture more treasured than any in the world's galleries. Big Boy's true ancestors were more recent. Locomotives like Big Boy were products of grueling schedules versus little engines. When business surged ahead in the West around the turn of the century, railroads serving that territory found they needed more power for increasingly longer trains. The power problem raised by lengthening a train had long been met by adding another locomotive. Double heading saved time on urgent freight, but it also meant investment in extra locomotives, expensive machines whose periods of usefulness were subject to the rise and fall of business. Nevertheless, it was a grand sight to see a pair of husky little haulers leaving town to the tune of out-of-beat exhausts. This perky museum piece with its 6 churning driving wheels was new in 1890. It was considered a Samson of the rails. But that was not enough, even then, and soon 6 drivers grew to 8. Then 8 became 10. As more feet were added to the iron horse, larger cylinders were needed to power them. More steam was needed to work the cylinders. And in this jack-built house on wheels, a larger boiler to supply the steam. In 1918, we put a number of Malleys to work on heavy grades. True to type with bulging front cylinders, these engines did a good job of pulling, but they were slow movers and hard on track. To get both the power and speed we needed, we returned in the mid-20s to the rigid frame engine. The result was the 9000 series, a locomotive of singular design. With 12 coupled driving wheels, it was the largest non-articulated engine ever built. It ran twice as fast as the Malleys, yet used less fuel. The 9000s served well on the plains, where rails curved gently. But in mountain country, where winding tracks resisted stiff-legged engines, their efficiency and power were impaired. So, as early as 1936, using roller bearings and better steels, we revived the articulated type locomotive. The result was the famous Challenger. They seemed the final answer to the railroader's dream. But with the threat of World War II, still more was asked of the railroads. A greater hauling capacity was needed, and even these locomotives were found wanting. Big Boy was born of necessity. Now the stretching of the locomotive had reached its maximum. Where the Challengers and 3900s had 2 sets of 6 drivers, Big Boy had 2 groups of 8. Like its forerunners, it had 4-wheel trucks under the front cylinders to lead it through the curves, and under the cab to support the huge firebox. Whether it was booming along at 80 or drifting easy, Big Boy radiated majesty. Massive and compact, a solid workhorse, yet limber as a trotter, magnificence was paired with performance. The 4000s were the largest and heaviest of their type ever built, 132 feet long, 1.25 million pounds in weight. Every inch of Big Boy had the look of irresistible force. Enough, in fact, to pull a loaded 5.5-mile-long train on level track. A distinguishing feature of this type of articulated locomotive was the reluctant manner in which the long, rigid boiler followed the front free-swinging engine unit around a curve. In the 18 years that the Big Boys reigned, they ran up a total of nearly 26 million miles, hauling billions of tons of freight as prime movers along our wartime lifeline, later carrying the goods of peace and a rising economy. During his final years, Big Boy made his last stand on a short but busy section of our main line, tough, demanding Sherman Hill, and then it was only during the annual fall rush, a few weeks a year. Even as the last wisps of steam were vanishing from railroading's yesterday, Big Boy's successors were ushering in a speed and space-hungry era. He gave way as electronics, jet power, and the atom were put to work on the iron trail. So Big Boy marked the end of big steam railroading in the West. He was not abandoned because he failed at what he was designed to do, but because a more efficient breed of iron horse appeared in the evolution of railroad locomotives.